Hi, this is Krishna Gopal. We are now live. Sorry for the small glitch. As usual, technology always lets you down at the last minute, and we had that problem. We are 3 minutes late, so we'll cover it up at the end and have three more extra minutes, subject to Satya's having time. Satya, thank you very much for agreeing to be on KG's live with me today. Thank you so very much. And
Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
Yes. So, without further ado, let us jump in. I've got a set of 10, 12 questions here for Satya. So, Satya, I went through your LinkedIn profile and I noticed that you did your, 10th standard exams from somewhere in Indranagar, and that sounds very much like Bangalore. And then you moved to an institute called Hua Chong, and that sounds very much, Asia Pacific, Oriental, and so on. Can you talk through that phase of your life and how those choices happened, Satya?
So I grew up in the fabulous city of Bangalore. Did much of my schooling at National Public School Indranagar, and until my 10th standard. At that point, I actually had the privilege of being selected as one of 25 students from across the country for a Singapore Airlines sponsored scholarship,
Wow.
and went to Hua Chong Junior College to pursue my 11th and 12th. And at that time, it was essentially the Cambridge A level exams. Um, it was actually very unique. This is back in the mid 90s, for parents to send a daughter abroad for 11th and 12th on my own, living in a hostel. And I credit much of this to my dad, his willingness to actually take that risk on me, and my mom for having supported that decision as hard as it was for her at that time. And I think that it's a privilege because they let me go. And I had 2 years of hostel based fabulous education at Hua Chong. We were one of four Indian students in that campus of about 1,500 students in Singapore, and allowed us to bring part of India and Indian culture to the campus and learn a lot about the culture of Singapore, which is actually a fabulous melting pot through those 2 years. Also had a phenomenal education um, at the college with the Cambridge curriculum, where I actually was forced to think application orientation and practical versus actually just learning up a number of formulas, or even biology, for example. I had to actually apply that into a very practical situation. That's what the Cambridge curriculum taught me, and so it was a phenomenal phase of my time, although I did struggle being a vegetarian at that time, on a campus. And so it was really hard as a young person living in a hostel, in that context, and continuing to find a way to be nourished.
All right. But how did you come across this Singapore scholarship? Well, you've heard of Chevening scholarship and this and that. I haven't heard of it, so I'm obviously much older. So, how did
Yes.
you come to know about this?
Well, it was an ad in the newspaper,
Okay.
and there was an entire application process. And I remember we actually came down to Chennai for the interview rounds, and then once I got selected, we did a little bit of due diligence, found out that there were others who had gone to Singapore on a similar scholarship in the years before. And so we went, met those families, and understood that this was essentially, I think we were the fifth or sixth batch at that time, and a well known program, but very exclusive, right? Which is why it's not known, I think, in the mainstream.
Wow. And as you said, the big support from your father and your mother to let you go 11th and 12th at that time, especially if you have not done hostel so far, so till that point in time. Super duper, fantastic. I also did notice from your LinkedIn profile that you did your BSc honors from Oregon State, from Singapore. Obviously, I think now it partly answers the question I'm about to ask. It already kind of stepped out. What I was wanting to ask was that. a lot of people go to the US post their graduation and not for graduation, at least
Yeah.
till about 5 6 years
Yes.
back. So how did that happen? How did that? What made you do your graduation there?
Yeah. So I've always been fascinated by biology, growing up as well as through my years in Singapore. So I was very keen to pursue the biological sciences. And that was the reason actually for me to look at opportunities across the world on where I could pursue the biological sciences. One, of course, is sort of the medicine track that we have in India. But because I chose to do this odd 11th and 12th in Singapore, then sort of doors get closed in our more traditional system, at least back then.
Oh,
And therefore at that point I said, all right, what's the next best thing? And I could actually study the biological sciences. And India at that time didn't have as much emphasis on good education in that sphere. So it was a matter of either continuing in Singapore or looking at other places like the US. And I was quite fascinated by some of the programs that I saw in the US. And let me talk through, if you don't mind, KG, why
of course.
Oregon State, right? While I could have done microbiology, biochemistry, a number of these in any of the other places, Oregon State actually gave me a full scholarship for my undergrad. And it was a very unique scholarship program for sharing my culture with the people of Oregon. So I had to do 80 hours of community service in a year, sharing aspects of my culture within their community. And in return, they gave me a full tuition waiver. And this very unique ability, right, of sort of leveraging what I know about my country and culture, being able to share it. And we come from, a middle class family at that time. And so being able to support my college education in the US and in the biological sciences, Oregon State had what is called the uh, Linus Pauling Institute.
Okay.
And Linus Pauling was a scientist that studied free radicals in an area of biology that I was very excited about. And so, between all of this, it sort of narrowed down on that particular university and program to be able to pursue my undergraduate.
Fantastic. So, students watching this, this is a slice of life for you to kind of learn from, get inspired from, of how that you made the change from India to Singapore. And, that Singapore actually turned out a little hard because, Indian doors closed down. And she didn't therefore look back on that, but went ahead and did something phenomenal at Oregon. Oregon, by the way, is also Rajneesh, isn't it, Satya?
That's right. That's right.
So,
Back then, it was that's the that's what people knew it for.
uh, all right. So was there any family influence for your choice of medicine, doctors at home, and all of that, microbiology, medicine, etc.?
So no, we don't come from a family of doctors, but uh, very young, I watched my grandmother be diagnosed with a disease back then that we didn't know so commonly, Alzheimer's disease. And we watched her health and cognitive function deteriorate over 14 years. And I watched it close hand. That prompted me to want to study the human brain and the neurodegeneration associated with it. And hence my particular interest in the human biosciences. And you'll see subsequently going on to my PhD, that is the area of my thesis research as well.
Wow. My mother had Alzheimer's, and I've been through that. And in Alzheimer's care, people always say that the more care has to be given to the caregivers, and so on. But is there any? I mean, I'm just going off track now. Is there any developments on arresting or even curing Alzheimer's? But I see a lot of them here where I stay also.
Yeah. No, not yet, right? Not like cancer, if caught early, can be cured. Even heart disease to some extent can be managed. But I don't think we have the ability to cure Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. What we do have the ability to is with some therapies slow the progression of. And I think that's the best that science has been able to do to date.
Palliative. All right. Fantastic. Uh, so, my next question is about your John Hopkins, amongst the best that is there in the area of whatever, medicine for sure. I'm sure other areas also. How did you prepare for this? You did your PhD there, right? I mean, you finished your graduation. You did your post graduation also in Oregon, or you went to John Hopkins, did post graduation and PhD
Yeah, no, so I went straight from a bachelor's degree
into
to a
PhD?
PhD program. You can do that if you are very clear and sure about what
Okay.
you want to do
Okay.
in your PhD. So I ended up just going straight into that PhD program. I think if I look back to that time and what it took to get into Hopkins School of Medicine was a track record of interest in the biological sciences. So even as an undergraduate, it is a bachelor's honors program because it had a thesis associated with the bachelor's program. And I did that thesis with the Linus Pauling Institute. And showing a track record of science and research even in the undergraduate years. The second area was knowing sort of why that university is relevant to the area of interest that you have to pursue, right? So between a few universities like Hopkins, there were a few others where the neurodegeneration department was very strong, and they had professors that were focused on that, and therefore that forms a little bit of a cluster, allowing you to say, this is why I want to come and do my PhD here. And the third is, of course, the academic door, right, which I'm going to call ensuring grades in undergraduate, but also the competitive exams. So in this case, the GRE and the GRE related to specific subjects and so forth.
Okay, and how did you prepare for that? And you talked about it a little bit, but were there any ups and downs, or it's a smooth sailing?
Within the PhD program,
Yes.
it's life is never smooth sailing, is it, KG? There's always ups and downs, and I think as long as you can not ride the ups too brashly and make sure you're balancing okay during the downs, I think you turn out okay. So when I started my PhD program, it was very clear that I wanted to go down the path of neurodegeneration. And I wanted to study Alzheimer's, specifically given the background. But once I did a few lab rotations, I realized that at that time and juncture, the Alzheimer's research was actually at a little bit of a deadlock in the community, and we weren't sure which way to go. I realized very quickly that the Parkinson's disease, which is another neurodegeneration disease of the brain, was actually picking up much more steam in the scientific community, had a lot of exciting things happening. And therefore, I chose to walk away from the narrow focus of Alzheimer's and saying, let me actually study brain disorders more generally and Parkinson's, because that's where the action is today. And switched labs to be able to pursue my full-time thesis in that space. I think over the years, I also realized that lab research is not easy and straightforward. It takes enormous commitment, long hours of being by yourself, and multiple experiments that you have to get right and prove right under similar conditions. And so it's quite laborious from that perspective, and therefore needs enormous commitment and patience. So it taught me some life skills as well, beyond what I'm going to call is the output of a thesis as well as then a doctorate degree.
Okay. Now I'm going to again go a little off track for my audience. You see, many people, many youngsters, Dr. Sathya, are uh, they are not clear on what they want to do in life, right? Probably you are very lucky. right? That your grandmother did a trigger, and something happened, right? So for example, a Sonu Nigam wants to get up in the morning and he sings and he makes money, and Sachin Tendulkar or whatever else, right? Whoever now is, and he plays cricket and he makes money out because whatever you like may not help you make money, right? So in your case, you are very lucky, but if you were to zoom out, and what would be, again, I'm going off track and out on a limb to ask you this question, what would be your advice to youngsters who are still not clear? How do they discover something that they ought to be doing, which also gives them a career? You are very lucky.
So one way to think about it is I am lucky, KG. I think the other way to think about it is in hindsight, I can tell a good story. Right. But the reality is, I think we will constantly find ourselves in those moments to figure out what is the path ahead. My own sense is there's got to be some area of interest combined with what you are good at. Because if you're interested in something but you're not really good at it, it's going to be hard to push yourself and to excel and therefore demonstrate that you could do better. So a combination of something that is somewhat interesting to you, and you have what I'm going to call intrinsic skill to be able to pursue. Whatever that is, it doesn't matter. Start there. I actually studied microbiology in Hopkins, which is all about microbes, and that has nothing to do with brain research. So if you actually think about it and you go deep into what I studied and how the application is, it was only subsequently in my third and fourth year that I learned a lot about the human sciences because of some courses I took, and then I got interested further in this area. So there's a number of things that we have to keep our eyes and ears open when we are going through this process. We may not have the answer necessarily just pop very clearly, but if we know our broadly an area of interest, what we are good at, find something that is in that space, and as you're going through it, be mindful and present so that you're picking up what you're actually excited by. Where did you really not enjoy that classroom? By the way, when I was in Oregon, it was right around that 98, 99, where everybody was doing computer science. Everybody was doing computer science, right? And there was a little fear in my head that I'm doing all of this in biology, not knowing if I will land up with a job, which is what most people post-college and post-degree want. Therefore, I minored in computer science in my undergraduate degree. I went out of the way, right, to take a set of classes that would give me a minor in computer science that would then allow me, if required, to go do a coding job. And then perhaps, then I got lucky. I ended up with Hopkins and I didn't need to code. But I think making sure, therefore, that you do have a backup to get you through, it'll make everybody feel safe, and definitely parents not worrying about you and becoming part of, your anxiety. It is also a helpful strategy.
I know. No, it's fantastic what you've said. That many people say pursue cricket but complete your graduation.
Correct, exactly.
It's as simple as that. Okay, in John Hopkins, when you were there, I know in the US atmosphere is different. But I'm coaching somebody, and I'm asking on the basis of that. Here, people get into a top institute. They've done very well from wherever they were, and they get into a top institute, and then they feel very inadequate. A lot of great guys are there in the institute, right? And then in that, somebody has to be 0 and somebody has to be 200, or 1 and somebody has to be 200. So how was the atmosphere there? How did you cope with all the bright minds?
Not easy, right? Because you suddenly realize everyone has come from top of the class from wherever, and you are one among. I think the first, you naturally are likely to feel what I'm going to call a sense of insecurity. What you have to do, or at least I did at that time, is to find a niche that allows you to excel. Find an area, niche, right? So it doesn't have to be top of the class in every class. But what is the one class that is most interesting to you? where you're going to be known for, which allows you to be, anchor around something that'll make you feel secure, and then deal with your insecurities in a much more calm manner. So, KG, I actually now teach at IIT Madras every Saturday afternoon. And I, used to teach a class for several years called Habits, Happiness, and Success, and then now teach a class around women leadership. And the entire objective of those courses is to ensure that we are helping the students come to terms with exactly what you described. And I think that increasingly we have to have conversations around this topic to make sure we are providing those in these elite top-notch institutions a place to feel safe, a place where they can air their insecurities, and most importantly, start to remember why they were so special. Every one of us is somewhat special, right? And I think what happens in these kinds of situations is you forget about it because there's nobody to remind you. You're living by yourself. You're not with your family. You're not with the friends and teachers that supported you. So find a way to stay in touch with them. Give them a phone call. Remind yourself, right, of what made you special, and find that niche that allows you to sort of maintain that center and then get through that phase.
Fabulous. One of the most useful answers and most useful question I thought of this discussion that we are having. No, it's basically catch yourself doing right, find your USP, right?
Yeah.
So I will get back to the track which says after your PhD, you moved straight into McKinsey, right? How did that happen?
So, like I said, during my PhD years, right, lots of life lessons, and I realized that I didn't thrive too well in what I'm going to call a lonely environment. It was not sort of what I had anticipated about science and research, and it's very, very long hours of lonely time. And so I decided at that point that this is not something that I want to pursue for the next 25, 30 years of my life. I also knew that at some point, I wanted to come back to India. It was one of those instincts that was there. And I knew that science research, if I was coming back to India, it's very hard to do. Very hard to do. So if I had a long-term plan to remain in the US and other countries that supported research, I possibly could have. But these were the two reasons I said, let me explore what else I could do with my degree and background. And so I looked at perhaps science writing and journalism. I enjoyed writing. And so is there a way for me to actually bring that together? I met my husband in that time frame, and he was doing something that was very interesting around business and consulting. And so I said, oh, that sounds interesting. I've never contemplated business through undergrad as well as my graduate years. And McKinsey came to campus for recruitment. And so I said, why not give it a shot and see what that looks like? Of course, the third option was to look at pharma companies and med device companies and to see if there was a career there. And so I was starting to explore these alternate paths away from academic research. And I got selected through the McKinsey process. And so I said, all right, why not? I mean, it is a premier management consulting firm. I know I will learn a lot. Why not give this a shot for a few years while I figure out what I want to do in my life? And that's how I actually ended up taking the job.
Wow. So that means McKinsey goes to a Johns Hopkins Medical University to hire?
Yes. So
Wow.
in the US, McKinsey actually has what they call MBA campuses where they hire, but they also have a hiring stream for non-MBA professionals. So they go to medical schools, law schools, PhDs, and say, listen, advanced degree holders they're looking for problem-solving skills and the ability to actually structure solutions. And then they say, we'll teach you the business skills on the job. So bring the problem-solving skills. And so this is a recruitment strategy that McKinsey has in the US.
Wow. I mean, that's very, very unusual. And I won't say unusual, it's off the normal, and that's why they are where they are, right? So you took a detour while at McKinsey and did a 9-month stint at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. What motivated you to do that?
So it was the first year of my son. And so I had a child. I wanted to find a way to be home more, travel less. And I think we all know that with consulting jobs, it's hard to ensure a no travel lifestyle. But I was determined that at least for the first year that I was feeding my child, I wanted to be home every night and be able to continue to have a professional career as well. And at that time, this opportunity came up where Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan was looking for somebody to set up a strategy office for them and help get their entire company to think about strategy. And so it sort of worked out well. I did a secondment, and that means an externship away from McKinsey with the option to come back when I'm ready. And so that.
Oh, hello? Sita, I think I lost you. Satya? Hello? Hello, Satya?
KG, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. And now you can see me also. Yeah. So what happened? Some power
Technically
drop.
chose to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
Okay.
okay. That's it. That's okay. So
All
you're
right.
saying something. Where were we? uh, we're talking
I was talking about
about
the.
medical school, McKinsey going to medical school, and then all of that. And then we said, you went to Blue Cross and you want to, yeah, you were talking about Blue Cross.
That's right. And so the secondment at McKinsey allowed me to come back when I was ready to McKinsey, and then pick up my path at McKinsey from that point onwards. So that was the little stint outside. And I think for women listeners out there, there will be times in our life where flexibility is important. And embracing sort of a balance between the personal and the professional for periods of time, I think, allow us to ensure that there is an opportunity over a career to find that balance.
Yeah. I think you kind of, I don't know, the lady from Pepsi was a CEO. She talks about the same things, right? Like what you're talking, former CEO. Okay, now you said at some point in time that you always wanted to return, right, back to India. That's a very different kind of a person. You're a little unique. And a very small percentage of people do that, right? Come back to India because everybody wants to go to the land of the riches, the land of plenty, and all that. What were your drivers? What is your advice to young professionals dreaming of migrating to the US for a better future? So, one is what were your drivers for wanting to come back? Always, and two, and people even now think it's like the escape. So what is your advice to people?
All right. So, at least for me personally, KG, perhaps it was the fact that I left India too early. that was a driver. Right? I was still young when I left, and those early years were not easy at all, right? Without family, without sort of the comfort of the home. And I think that played psychologically some significant part that I wanted to be back home. I also was lucky and privileged, I feel, to have embraced much of the comforts of the US life early, um, both through the PhD years as well as through McKinsey in those early years, was very privileged, right? So it was good, comfortable life. And so it ended up being a been there, done that. And therefore, a satisfaction and contentment, right, over having lived a good, solid life early, and then said, listen, let's actually go home where I feel very much connected to the fabric of the place I came from, closer to family, closer to parents, and the environment that I wanted my children to grow up in.
Wow. My followers always know I say this, right? You can never make a right decision. You'll always make the decision right, right? That's one part. Other part is there's no heaven on earth, right? So when you moved back, so it applies to both, right? US also, to India also. So when you moved back, I'm sure there would have been a lot of, did I do the right thing, et cetera, et cetera. And you must have made a lot of efforts to make the decision right. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah. So while I always wanted to come back and I was clear about that decision, it was root shock when I landed back, because I'd been away from India for 15 years. And when I had left, I was in the comfort of a home and a child, versus having to deal with professional India, having to deal with having, a independent lifestyle, um, very different skill sets. And I think that root shock actually got me, and the initial years were very hard, exceptionally hard. Um, Sriram, my husband, and I were committed to staying, but there were many moments where, we wondered whether this was the right thing. I think what worked in our favor was that we ensured that the reasons we moved back remained, right? So we stayed with family, no question about it. Yes, that takes adjustment, but if we moved back for that purpose, then let's make that work. So we live with family. And that then allowed a sense of community support for our children, for us to continue to professionally do what we needed to do. At the same time, built bonds between our children and the grandparents and between us, right, as a family. And I think that that was the major driver of what kept us and kept us happy. I think the second is to give time. Oftentimes, that first 2 years, 3 years is hard. It took me 4.5 years before I was ready to say, all right, I'm settled, I love it here, and I'm ready to close the door. That's not 1 year, 18 months, 2 years, right? That it took me 4.5 years. And so you have to give it the time. But not just you, it's a unit that has to make that decision. And I think oftentimes, if you're not lucky with the unit, that is, the children are not settled, the spouse is not settled, then that gets really hard. So in our case, we made sure and tried to ensure that the unit felt settled, because that's the only way that with time and with the family, we could actually make this work.
Wow. You're so specific when you said 4.5. So what was that aha moment?
It was when, this is funny, but it was when I finally was qualified for a resident account, bank
Resident?
account, bank account.
Wow.
Right? Until then, I had to operate with the non-resident account, and it made life so hard because I was so used to just having access to whatever, right? Maybe this is how I think about it. But that resident bank account was an important moment in my life, and it really suddenly I felt that I was back in the fabric of India, right? I was accepted here. And so that's why I saw that moment stayed with me.
4.5 years. So there's a liberation moment. Okay.
Yes.
Super. And okay, coming back to your job and coming back to Apollo and all that. See, I mean, Apollo preventive health. Sorry, sounds like the China of the old. Maybe I've read about it. I don't know that you paid the doctor as long as you were well, right? And the
Mm.
minute you fell ill, you stopped paying him, and then he cured you, and after that, you started paying again. Is Apollo Preventive something like that, or what is it?
That's the philosophy of it, right? We want to actually get more and more people be proactive about their health and not come in with that emergency, not come in with the symptoms. The reality is, we are never going to have enough infrastructure, health infrastructure, to be able to deal with the number of heart attacks and cancers that are coming our way if we don't stem the lifestyle choices that are leading to this. And those lifestyle choices are very much in our individual control, and it requires us to take proactive control of our health much, much before it becomes a symptom, right? And so, very much proactive health, well before it becomes a symptom. You start to feel the signs of it, you know it. When we talk about sleep, stress, food we take in, the activity we have, all of that, right? This is not new gyan, it is known. Yet we don't choose to act on it until it becomes a symptom. And the goal and the mandate of preventive health within Apollo is for us to get more and more people to think about their health proactively.
Wow. Do you have in Bombay?
Yes, we do actually, very much.
I'll take
Yes,
it
we do.
from you. Maybe you should put it in the comments or something for my audience. My audience largely is well, in the north and the west and all that. So, but since I'm from Bombay, many of them are in Bombay also. But I'm sure you have in
We're-
Bangalore. What
Yeah,
cities
we
you
are
have?
operational in 110 centers across the country. So, yes,
Wow,
absolutely.
wow, wow, super duper. One more question is that you've become CEO, right? I mean, that is the pinnacle of the corporate ladder, if that's what it is. And most CEOs come from the sales and the marketing and that kind of a finance background. So, how was your journey to the CEO spot?
Yeah. So I think we talked a little bit about sort of my love and for science and the human sciences. We talked a little bit about the McKinsey management consulting years that sort of I realized that I loved the business side of uh, of things as well. I also spent 4 or 5 years with the Hindu group, the media house, and that taught me marketing and dealing with sort of different consumer segments and how to market to them. What I love about this role now is actually a combination of my love for the human sciences and making it practical with the business side of things. And this sort of is fortuitously come together. Did I plan for this when I first started out as an undergraduate? Hardly, right? But I think that sort of it's come together in this role, and therefore I am grateful for it. Um, but it's nicely bringing together the ability to converse with doctors in the language of medicine, take what their message is out to common consumers' language in a way that will help them act, and to ensure that this is therefore a sustainable way to be able to drive change and not just a charitable cause.
Fantastic. Uh, you know, so I'll put you one. There's one question from one of the my followers. It says that in this world we don't want to be with don't want to ever meet doctors or lawyers or police, right? And many times we get the feeling that when you get into a doctor or a clinic, they treat you as a large account and try to do so many tests and this and that. So you are in this field yourself. So how do you kind of balance this out? Between patient care and needs versus shareholder needs, right? So the both are there because now hospitals are run as a business.
Yeah. So I think there's multiple ways for us to think about it, and it's sad that we fear doctors that way, right? As a community. Um, I think about each one of us is unique. Each one of our health needs are unique. Each one of us is making very different lifestyle choices. And so, why do we go and do a set of standardized health check tests? Why not ask for it to be personalized? Why do we actually not make a thoughtful, deliberate conversation with our doctor about how we can prevent the next episode of what we came to do so, right? To get their consult on. I think that increasingly we're also finding ways to see how we can measure clinical outcomes in a manner that allows us to find the right balance between testing for your needs, making sure that we understand the root cause of why you had something. If it is preventable in the future, then how do we ensure that you are armed with that information so that you don't come back again? I think all of this needs to be part of the fabric, right, of the healthcare ecosystem. And consumers should demand it. And we ourselves are trying to bring that as much as possible into the work that we're doing.
And okay, yeah, the medical profession, sorry, the doctor profession is a 24/7 profession, right? And but as a CEO, you're probably not as much there on the ground facing patients and all that. But do you still get midnight calls?
Definitely not anywhere close to some of our frontline workers, right? The doctors, nurses, and so forth. Um, but every now and then it's someone, a friend of a friend or a family member, and that happens. But more than anything else, I think if during COVID, every one of us worked through those times, came into work because there is a sense of solidarity with our colleagues who are the frontline workers and doing this at odd hours. And so I think as colleagues, as peers in solidarity, we stood by them.
Very nice. So I'll end this talk. Thank you very much by asking one final question, rather one final request. Ladies and gentlemen, I met Sathya, Dr. Sathya, at the Sindhi Chamber of Commerce award function in Chennai. I think on the 10th of August, and she was a chief guest there. And as a chief guest, she gave a little speech which I thought was very powerful. So I'm going to request her to give a succinct version of that as we end this conversation. Satya.
Thank you, KG. So I talked that evening about how we're all born with an account. That account is essentially our health. Every one of us has a different rate of interest um, that grows on that account. And that's a function of the genetics that we are born with, right? So all of us come from different ancestral backgrounds and we have a set of genetics. And so our rate of interest of what the account grows at is also different. From that point on, every choice that we are making is either a deposit or a debit from that account. And what I mean by that, so KG, you've been sitting this entire time that we've been chatting for about 45 minutes. I, on the other hand, have been standing during this 45 minutes. So in my book, KG, you actually debited from your account for the last 45 minutes, while I did deposit a little bit by merely standing right through this time and ensuring a little bit of physical activity. If you choose to eat a large carbohydrate rich meal every meal of the day, then that's a debit. But if you ensure that there are 3 or 4 servings of fruits and vegetables and a reasonable amount of protein in that meal, which will naturally decrease the amount of carbs, you are depositing, right? So there's a way for us to think about every action that we take as a debit or a deposit into that account. And every now and then, please do go check what the balance in that account is, to make sure that you do a health check to ensure that you understand where you are. And for the long lives that every one of us is going to lead, do we really have enough in that account to ensure we are well taken care of through that long life? So that's where I'd like to end, right?
Thank you very much. Clap one more time. And thank you very much again for joining this KGisLive. I hope we had for my followers, I hope it was a very, very useful session. I'm sure it was. And till another time, see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.